The Midwife Crisis podcast will touch on sensitive topics regarding the human body, sexuality, pregnancy, and all aspects of women's health care, and may not be suitable for all listeners.
Hello, I'm Kate.
And I'm PR, and this is the Midwife Crisis, because it's not just you.
So today, in our sort of part 2 episode, as we've been gone during the pandemic, we're going to talk about the other crisis that the world is facing today, one that's been around for far too long, and that's gained new and essential momentum. And that is bringing the vast, calculated, and systemic injustices that are working against and killing Black people to light. You know, as I wrote the post on our Instagram and Facebook, which if you haven't seen, we made a nice post and we got some really great responses. But I made the post on our social media, and I talked about how from the very beginning, from the time that PR invited me on this journey with her, it's always been centered around the idea that we are so different. Anytime we sit down and we talk about things, just our life experiences are so different, just like all women, just like all people with uteruses. And we always try to address that every time we talk about any topic. PR always talks about Black and Latinx, and I always, try to talk about and address being white and queer, because that's sort of who we are and what we know. And we know that even though we are so different, we are also in some ways the same. And it's always been apparent that for me, as a straight presenting white cisgendered woman, I've always been treated, quote, better, for lack of better word. And that's always been and still is ridiculously unfair. It's a huge problem, and it's something that needs to change. And one thing I want to say before we start this podcast is I am not perfect, but I see my privilege, and I am so sorry for the injustices, for the horrible things that have happened to the Black community forever. And I vow that I'm going to do whatever I can do to educate myself, to hold myself accountable, to hold others accountable, to have awkward conversations, to teach my children, and to freaking fight for what is right, because it is not right. It's been too long, and it's time to do something. So.
And I appreciate your allyship, actually. You have gone beyond just making posts. You have been having these awkward conversations. You have been donating money. You've been putting money behind the causes, and you have sort of sidelined some friendships. And I mean, you've been really putting in the work. And so that's the kind of thing that sometimes you will stumble. That's what doing the hard work entails. But I just want to say thank you. And if you could just infect a few more people, that would be really awesome. This is the proverbial best and worst of times. I mean, how many lynchings does it take to wake everybody up? And I think it's pretty obvious for those reasons. That's why it's the worst of times. I mean, we can say why it's the worst of times. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, what about her killers? Tony McDade, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, going back a few years. And it's so many names, like so many names. And then there are so many names that are unnamed, because this has been going on for centuries, and even in modern times. It's not, George Floyd, his murder was recorded. And so it was for all the world to see, and that touched something in everybody. I mean, some of his last words, he called for his mama. And so that really struck a chord, and it didn't matter what color you were. And so in modern times, but this has been going on and unrecorded for far too long. And so the problem for me is like a multi-layered cake. And I say it's the best of times because now we're opening this up again, and there are many opportunities here for change. Right. But we have to seize them, basically. I like cake, but not too much cake at once. And so, because the thing is, though, this is a multi-layered, because it's about racial justice, it's about legal justice, but also it's economic, it's educational, it's social rights, it's healthcare. And until we address all of these areas with regard to the treatment of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, very little is going to change. You can't just change one part and not change the rest of it. And, we did an episode on COVID, and we were talking mostly about women and people with uteruses. But, one thing that bared mentioning is that, COVID is rampant with amongst the incarcerated, and
Yes.
and in nursing homes, and that's like being incarcerated. And so that's something that almost like being incarcerated, because those people usually can't go anywhere. But that's something we need to address. And who are the incarcerated? People of color. That
Right.
this is another form of controlling people of color. And so I feel like we as Black, Latinx, and people of color have been working for our whole lifetimes on how to best get by in a society that doesn't play fair. And it has a head start. And we're trying to start from behind the line and catch up, and then even surpass, like do the best we can to make the best of the situation that we are in. So I think that the conversation definitely, it begins with acknowledging that those privileges exist, that racism exists. We have to say the word. And
Yes.
I've been recently reading Ibram Kendi's book, his How to Be an Anti-Racist, and it's a good book for everyone to check out. It's not just for white people. It's not. He is very explicit that this book is. The book was for him too, and he's Black. It's for everyone. Because you don't want to just say, I'm not racist. You want to be an anti-racist. And that's a very important distinction. And I think it's really worth reading the book just to sort of gain that knowledge. It's a start. You have to start somewhere. And so today, our podcast is based on the premise, well, not just today, every day, Kate, actually, our podcast is based on the premise of intersecting the care and health of women and people with uteruses and their experiences with race and culture and sexual identity and gender identity. And so this is like, this whole scenario that we're living in right now is like what we are about, what we are trying to accomplish in this podcast.
Right.
Being so opposite from one another, but able to kind of work together to try and bring a message to people that we care for, and have in kind to say, you're not the only one. And let's do what we can to try and change the situation. So we were going to start with a couple of stories. Not very long, just little scenarios that are examples of sort of what we've been kind of going through. I mean, I have a whole lifetime list of microaggressions and situations that I've had to live through and stuff like that. So I'm not starting back from the time of my birth. And I was, unfortunately, I'm dating myself, but I was born during Jim Crow.
Yeah. It's been something for a lot of like white people who feel very like woke. Like for me, I grew up in a time where I sort of quote unquote didn't see color, like I loved everyone, I'm queer in my like racial desires as well, like it doesn't matter what race you are. I've never cared. It's never been, a thought for me. And as it turns out, that is a problem, because it is important that despite the fact that I love and care for everyone, and I don't want to see us as different. I want us all to be together and lovey and the same. The fact of the matter is that you are a beautiful, professional, well-educated, Ivy League educated woman who is Black, who has had to face all these things. And it's important to see and make that distinction and make sure that I'm aware of it. And I think that for a lot of us, like I said, that tend to be more of that way. I don't know even know how to say it, but who try to be more allies need to like really address like it's not enough to just say like we're all equal or whatever. Like that's a problem because we're not. And so I think you sharing some of the stories that you have shared and that you're going to share is so important because it does remind us that despite the fact that you are successful and wonderful, it's been a struggle. It makes no difference. It doesn't look at it that, you know, at the end of the day, you are still who you are with the color of the skin that you have, and it's affected you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. For those of you who have followed us from the beginning, I talk a little bit in our early episode about excuse me, about one of the reasons why I came into this business. And I also told a story which was sort of an attachment to one of our episodes or to our on our website about it was a story called The Seed, and it also described in greater detail about why I went into the business of caring for women and people with uteruses. And there's a lesson for you right there, because I'm just going to digress for 1 second. This is how you learn things. So when we got in this and we started working together, I would say women, and Kate would say people, and people with uteruses, and when people give birth. And I said to her, I don't really like it when you say people, because that disempowers women, because only women can give birth. That's not really fair. And she said to me, and what about trans men who want to have a family? And I said, oh, okay. Okay. So there, I learned something. So change your tune, and
Exactly.
that's how you learn.
Right.
I did not take offense to that. She was teaching me something, and that's what we're trying to do here on the podcast. We're trying to learn from each other, and we're trying to teach also our listeners that it's not just you, and that you can affect change, and you can be the change, not to be cliche. But I was assaulted as a teenager. I was 15 actually, during my first GYN visit by a male OBGYN. And I think that I was examined by him without a chaperone, and a bit of an aggressive exam, and what we know now to be an inappropriate exam. And then I was told to come back in 6 months, and he said I needed to be examined again because I was pursuing birth control pills, and I was doing it without my parents' knowledge. So I was trying to do what I thought was smart, because I was going to protect myself from getting pregnant, and I was going to, I thought, well, this is really a smart thing. And in the end, I think that he took advantage. Here I was, a 15-year-old girl. I was a girl, not a woman, who from the inner city, and who presented without her parents. And I don't think that he would have done the things to me that he did, both times without a chaperone, if I were not Black and presenting from, the inner city by myself. And so that I don't have another reason to think that way. When other people talk about their exams, it's a very different experience. When other white women that I know talk about their exams, it's very different. And so I just can't help but think he did that, and he did it on purpose, and he picked me because I was vulnerable.
I was white. I was the same age, and I had no knowledge, and I had the complete opposite experience. And it's really sad and interesting that mine also sort of fueled this like interest I had in caring for women and people with uteruses. But yeah.
So our ultimate goal to care for these people is driven by our experiences, but our experiences were different. So my experiences were negative and hers were positive. Ultimately, mine became positive also as I interacted with other healthcare providers, with midwives and with nurse practitioners. Shout out to Planned Parenthood, because I met a nurse practitioner from there, and she was just brilliant. Anyway, another scenario is that in doing OB care at the hospital, every once in a while, not I wouldn't keep track of the frequency, but this would happen. I would work with a good friend of mine who is white, and she was a nurse working there. She doesn't work there now. And she would meet a patient, and she would say, "Oh, I have your patient in whatever room, and she's delightful." And I had already met the patient, and I think to myself, "Well, really?" Because she was very lukewarm to me when I went in the room. She was lukewarm. Her husband was tepid. They weren't very friendly. And I went in with a smile and I say, "I'm so and so. We didn't get to necessarily meet when during pregnancy. And so I'm glad to be here for you. And this is what I can do. And let me know, and this and that." And so I go out and she says that to me. And so then I go back in, and she pointed this out to me recently. She said that when we saw each other, because we're friends, and she said, this, when all of this racial stuff sort of came to the fore, she said, I really feel some kind of way about all of that. So I would go back in the room after she told me that, and she would come in the room, and I would tell the patient, I would share with them, she's my friend. Like, we would kind of joke around about different things. And then I would say, we go on vacations together sometimes, and we have dinner, and then she would throw in a couple of 2 cents about the things that we do together and how much fun we have. And that, my daughter had a quinceañera when she turned 15, and her son was one of the young men that participated, one of the escorts for the girls. And so, and then the couple would warm up. And after I did that a few times, she realized that it was a strategy to try to get them. I used her to get them to be warmer, like to accept me. I'm the person who's going to catch your baby, who's going to provide you with the best care that I can. I'm skilled. But my buy-in was through her, a white nurse who she's competent and she's good, but doesn't have the skills to actually do the birth, to catch the baby, to repair your bottom, to do whatever else has to be done. But my acceptance was my card in was through her. So that was, that's kind of a quirky little thing there. And the third thing was myself as a patient. Long after that first situation, this isn't with an OBGYN, it's with another physician who I was having an issue, and that person and it was a very serious issue, and that person didn't believe me, I don't think, and said to me, "Well, take this medicine, and why don't you call me back at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and let's see when the sun rises," they said, "and let's see how you're doing then." And I thought, this is really serious. I'm not well. Like I happen to have been bleeding. And so I said, this is serious. This is real. Like, I don't know if I can wait that long. And he said, "No, I think you're fine. I suspect you're fine." And I waited until 5 o'clock, and I went into the emergency room, and I passed out at the door of the emergency room, and I wound up needing a transfusion, so my regular physician person said, "Did you tell him that you were?" And I said, "I told him everything. I told him what was happening. I told him how often it was happening, what was going on." And he said, "Just, take this medicine and just go lie down, and let's see what happens at the sunrise." So there's this misconception that people of color are like, they can muscle through things, and that they can have higher tolerance for pain, and that we're drug seeking, and that wasn't the case. And so that winds up causing a disparity in care that I think some folks aren't even aware of. The implicit bias that they have, they aren't even thinking Like, this is a recording that's in the back of their head. It's not in the front. And so they're not even thinking that they're doing something wrong. They think they're providing really good care. But the reality is, if you're providing such good care, why is there such a disparity in healthcare outcomes? And the disparity applies to people of color, whatever color. And so that means that there's something wrong with the care you're providing. There is a problem there. And so you're not providing what's needed, or there's some kind of gap. And you are a competent, well-educated, skilled provider. So what's wrong with where is the problem? And the problem is not with you're too smart for the problem to be with the patient. The problem is with the provider.
Yes. Yeah. I just hear that you were just being ignored. And I wonder, or just dismissed. And I wonder again, if you were white and had said, listen, I am really unwell, if they would have told you to go lay down. We're all different. And we always talk about meeting patients where they are. Right. And, I've always felt strongly that I give patients options. So like in the middle of the night, of course, we don't want to send someone to emergent care if they don't need it. But I always listen to the patient, assess them, and then say, based on what you're saying, I think it's probably okay, but also I'm not there and I can't tell you 100%. So if you are telling me you think you need to be seen now, then you should come. If you think that you're okay for right now, let's just keep in contact. Let's, I'll give them practical solutions, but, to kind of dismiss it and just say, just go lay down. Frankly, it's dangerous. And it's upsetting.
Well, the other piece of it is that, I usually have to identify myself as a provider, as a clinician. Also, like I have to call it, like I'm a clinician. This is a dangerous amount of blood loss that's occurring here. And so I would, if I had a patient in this situation, then I would have them be seen. And then to still be told, well, just try this medication and then we'll see what happens 5 hours from now. And
right.
And then, maybe I wouldn't have needed a transfusion or whatever. In the end, I wound up needing surgery, not just a transfusion. So it is just really disconcerting. And that's the kind of thing where you say, so here I am, a person who's well educated, like you have said, Ivy League educated, and a provider in that very same institution, and but I'm still not getting the kind of care that probably someone else who is who has all factors being equal except skin color is going to get.
Yeah. Yeah, it's bananas. And frankly, I've seen it, I think about working in healthcare, people may sort of know this about me or not know this about me from pictures and stuff, but I am like a little punky. I'm a little alternative. I'm very into self-expression. And so I have tattoos and I have a nose piercing and I always have multicolored hair and, all these things that I have always done, even as a professional person. And I see that many times no one says anything to me about those things. And I just move on and that's who I am. And I've seen people of color, Black people, Latinx people that I work with who haven't had that, who have, said, oh, you have your nose ring in? I was told I couldn't wear my nose ring. And I'm like, so that's a problem, like just because I'm white and I, like I'm quote unquote getting away with it. That's ridiculous. And we need to speak to that, we need to be able to address it. When you're talking about sort of having to use our friend who's a nurse to sort of like finagle in with a patient, and you had asked me earlier today, do you ever have to do that, especially if you're dealing with, like Black patients or, I always feel, and I guess I've sort of known this, that I need to more carefully earn a Black person's trust. And I don't know why, but I think that's just been inside of me, that I know that they've been through a lot and may or may not trust me, and that I don't look like them, and that I need to show them that they're safe and that they're valued and that I care about them. And so I find that I probably overdo it a little bit in those cases, and I really go like 240, like I give 110% because I want to make sure that they know that I am a safe person. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I shouldn't have to do that, but I want to because I want them to feel safe. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing that I do, but typically I hope and I do think that those people do feel safe with me. I do know that sometimes when I go in to care for a patient who is Black, and I'm working with my colleague that I'm very close with who is also Black, and we very much present as like a ragtag team, I think patients do feel better about that. And I think a huge part of these drives for, GYN and OB care to get more midwives and nurse practitioners and nurses of color, whether it be, again, that they're Latinx, that they're Black, that they're Indigenous, so that people can see themselves in their healthcare provider. I think that is hugely important. Mm-hmm. And I can never be that, despite the fact that I have 5% Congo in my DNA. I will never stop looking white and being white, and that is who I am. And so I guess in my way, I sort of try to overcompensate a little bit.
So you're trying, you're making effort, and eventually you get in the groove of what works, and you find out what your patients need, and you try and give that to them. But there's nothing really worse than not trying and not really acknowledging. So, and that's an issue that I have. So now that, since George Floyd's murder, I had a lot of friends, work friends, I will call them, because they aren't people that I necessarily socialize with much outside of work, but a lot of work friends who I would chit chat with and that kind of thing. And they've sort of fallen by the wayside. And I think they are so uncomfortable with a conversation. Like, someone asked me, how are my children? And I said to her, they're fine. Two of my children live on the West Coast. And I said, they're fine. They're isolating, but now they've just started to venture out since this murder. And they are, they engaging in protests and supporting Black Lives Matter, agenda and that kind of thing. And she changed the subject. I'm like, hello, weren't we talking about something? And so she's like off. I said, okay, well, you know what? I can't spend my whole day trying to educate people. And so right. I was like, okay, you go over there and you can just stay over there. And so this is someone who I put my feet under a table and had dinner with her before. And I'm just like, no, I can't. The energy that it takes is just a lot. It's a lot. And it's very interesting that people that you have shared stories with, and they've shared secrets with you and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it's sort of, no, we're not going to talk about that. And they don't realize how uncomfortable like that makes me. And at the same time, also, I find myself a little more intolerant of all of these brilliant people that I work with, but you can't find the knowledge to try and figure out how you can take better care of your patients of color, and how you can be more respectful of your colleagues of color and engage with your colleagues of color in a respectful manner. And so it's sort of like just a total lack of understanding, or not even concerning yourself with anything that's going on of the microaggressions, of the weathering that we are enduring to try to just get through. And I think people would like for it to go back to the way it was. And I hope it never goes back to the way it was, because the way it was terrible. It was tiring, and it makes me more tired than I am now. I don't need it to go back to the way it was. And this is historical stuff. Like it dates back to enslavement, really. And that's the thing, that's why I said this is a layer cake. Because let's talk real quick about education. If you grow up and you see that enslaved people were brought over in 1619, and then that's pretty much it until like Martin Luther King appears on the scene. So where were people of color all in between there? And so you don't see them. You know what that means? They don't matter. Whatever they did, they built the White House, that doesn't matter. Or that Asians built the rail system, that doesn't matter. That you took the land from indigenous people here who were here first, that doesn't matter either. And so it's because it's not, all we get a taste of the indigenous is Thanksgiving. And so, that also is like a big old, you should be thankful, but that's a hoax because, how many people died so you can have that dinner. And so, that it starts there. Children are educated, you have very young children, so they should be learning this stuff at an early age about who did what and who contributed what and it's not just only one group of people that did something that mattered in this country. And so I think that is, that's a big issue. And that's an issue that people don't even realize what they don't know. That all that to say.
Right. And I do want to say just briefly that as far as these issues have happened and that we're talking about things in the workplace and everything, it is not up to you as a person of color, as a Black person, to make these changes. It is up to us as white people to educate ourselves, to come up with a plan, to recognize where our deficits lie, to recognize where we need to put in more work. And, that's been something that I've really tried to take over. Like at my own workplace, I remember them saying, oh, let's check with, this person that we work with that's Black, just to make sure that they're comfortable with it. And I was like, no, they have a lot of shit on their plate right now. Like, why don't we just grab this thing, by the reins and take care of it? Like, don't be scared to say the wrong thing, because what's going to happen if you say the wrong thing? We're going to fix it. We're going to learn something. And that's the only way that we can get better, and not to say that I am infallible, because I was telling PR earlier that I have a patient who I love and have cared for many years, who is a Black woman. She's a lesbian woman that we had this awesome conversation at her GYN visit about the Black Lives Matter movement and about how she talks to her young son and how I'm trying to educate my sons to, be allies and to be aware of their privilege and all these things. We had this wonderful, wonderful visit, and I went to do her exam and I asked for permission to examine her. And when I touched her, she jumped, as many people do. And I said, "I'm so sorry that I spooked you." And I immediately heard the words come from my mouth and said, "I cannot use that word. That is a word that is born into racism." And PR is kind of laughing. I am, as you guys may know, I'm obsessed with Halloween. So I always say spooky Halloween, all this stuff. And I need to actively work to not use words like that, because they are hurtful and they are negative, and I need to change my vocabulary. And so I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but just like when we talk about, using gender affirming terms for people, you make a mistake, you just fix it, right, and you apologize, you fix it, and you move on. You don't grovel, you don't go on and on about it. Of course, knowing me, I'll hold on to it for the rest of my life, because I'll be like, I upset that poor woman, but this is what we need to do. So yeah.
And it's a lot of languages, we make common, errors with language. I think we had a chat about it earlier that somebody said to me, I asked them to do something, a nurse, and she said, "Okie dokie, Smokey." And I said to her, okay, time out. You can say okie and you can say dokie, but don't say Smokey, because that's offensive. Really? Why? Why is that offensive? I say it all the time. Well, because you say something all the time doesn't mean it's not offensive. And then I said to her, it's historical. So there was a time when people couldn't be so bothered to learn the names of Black people. So you call them names like Smokey. And I almost introduced myself in the beginning of the podcast, instead of saying PR, I almost said this is Black Mona. And the reason I was going to say Black Mona was because that was a nickname that they used to call my mother when she was young, because she's really dark skinned. And her name is not Mona. So it's just like, let's just call her anything. And put black in front of it because she's real dark. And so I said to them, that's why you can't. It's just don't say it. And Kate said to me, why don't you tell her to look it up? I said, well, that was a quick lesson, and I don't mind that. But I can't weigh myself down with trying to give lectures and lessons, every day, all day. And I have to, the other thing is, trying to, these are people I have to work with, I have to rely on when I'm in a crunch situation with patients and that kind of thing. So I want to maintain a good working relationship, but at the same time, it's sort of, some things that are said and done really make me crazy. And the way I say it, I have to watch, because then it's like, angry Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're not hearing a fucking thing I'm saying. All you hear, all you see is that I'm angry and that I'm Black. And so it's like, oh, did you see her? She was pissed and she was so did you get the point that I was making? No. So now I have to guard myself. Well, how often do you guard yourself when you're saying things? Probably not, almost never. And so it's just like every day, all day. And so when people say things like, I can't listen to this anymore, it's just too tiresome, all this racial stuff and all this protesting and all this, oh my God, it's just so much. And I'm like, really? Lucky for you, you get to turn it off, because you know what? I get up every morning and I go to brush my teeth and I look in the mirror and I'm looking at the same Black face every day. I love it. I love my skin. I love my face, and I love my teeth. They're pretty white. However, I don't get to turn it off. I don't get to say, I'm tired, and I hope nobody says anything stupid to me today. And I just go into the day with the assumption that they won't. And when they do, I have to deal with it, because otherwise I would just get out of bed tired already.
Yeah. Must be nice, Karen. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to use my privilege and just run my mouth constantly. Because I'm fed up because I love you. I want everyone to, everyone should be able to just be themselves and be set up in the same way. And it's infuriating. So we're going to talk a little bit about just sort of historically how, racism and how our society has set up, our patients, our GYN and OB patients to be, disproportionately, I don't even know what words to say, just having poorer outcomes and being treated worse and having, worse situations, and it stems from exactly what you said, what we teach. History in America is whitewashed. And, last year I took my kids to Virginia and we went to the Jamestown settlement, and the opening of the Jamestown, entrance video is African Americans, indigenous people, Europeans coming together to build this country. And I was like, I literally had to leave the room, because I was like, did we come together? Were they like, hey, come over and kill us with smallpox? And then Africans were like, yeah, let me get on your boat and be shackled and enslaved and, raped. What the? I was so pissed off. And people were just okay with it, with it being presented on a platter because it's comfortable and it's easy and it feels better that way. And you know what? Not okay. F that biz. We have to start by really rewriting history and not being scared to talk about these things, like the forced sterilization of Black and indigenous women, where we, wouldn't allow them to have any more children, or we would take their children from them and then force them to feed white children. Mm-hmm. What is happening? Of course, there's going to be, Black women today who don't want to breastfeed, because that is triggering. Can you imagine? I can't. Anyone who has ever lactated, who has ever fed a baby from the chest or breast, think about that for a second. It is deeply disturbing. And something that I had written about and PR had said that she wasn't aware of, and maybe some of you may be aware of, is there's been, everyone knows there's been all these statues being taken down. You know, we're getting rid of Confederate flags, we're changing names because we are trying to set things right. Okay. And one of the statues that had been torn down in New York City was of James Marion Sims. And the reason why this really affects gynecology is because he is sort of laureled as the father of modern gynecology. He has been praised for his quote unquote work. And I want you to know that this was not work, this was abuse, and this was horror. And the way that he became the father of gynecology with his quote unquote science was through torture and experimentation of Black women, of enslaved women. The first that he ever worked on was an enslaved woman named Lucy, who he had stay on her hands and knees, which I don't know if you've ever held that position for a while, but they said hours with no anesthesia while he performed surgery on her, basically.
Ooh.
So had tools in her bladder, in her uterus. She developed a horrible infection, almost died. He said many times he thought that she would die and that she was in excruciating, agonizing pain, but did nothing. Okay. She survived, and he was celebrated because he was able to fix this. It's what's called a fistula, this hole between a bladder and a uterus. And
between bladder and vagina.
I'm sorry. Yes, bladder and vagina. But, and I think of this, and here's this person who's, praised for what he did and this work he put in. And there's no mention about the torture that he put women through. And it wasn't just Lucy. It was many, Black women who had no choice, who had no say, who were literally tortured. It sounds like a horror movie, and it's real. And we don't mention that. And we need to mention that. Like, we have things that we have because of the actual lives laid down by these people, many times forcibly. And that is huge. Not to mention, this brings up, like I just mentioned, this transgenerational trauma. So trauma of what has been lived by one's family, by one's community, by one's past. So when PR says, Black Mona, like that's a real thing, that people carry with them. And so when I say I feel that I need to earn the trust of my patients of color and my Black patients, it comes from that place. It comes from knowing that they know what has been done to them. Look at the Tuskegee,
yes, experiment that they did on the men that gave them syphilis on purpose.
Right. And they just watched it unfold to see what was going to happen to them. That is awful. That is unethical. That is not in this do no harm, model that we tout as healthcare providers. And then, people wonder why, there's a Black woman who let her, not let, but had cancer and had the symptoms and didn't seek care because she was scared. The knowledge that we have about breast cancer comes from a Black woman who had breast cancer, and her body continues to be looked at. We still have tissue samples from her that is helping us cure other people's cancer. And again, this is pushed under a rug. No one's talking about that.
Henrietta Lacks, they take her cells and do all kinds of work with it and do not help her, compensate her. It's just, and that's, she's not given credit. They'll give credit to some old white fellow that, I don't know, discovers something that's okay, but just not like didn't sacrifice life.
Yeah.
And so
we should have put a trigger warning before I started talking, and I do apologize for that. So we'll have to make sure that we put that on the episode because this is uncomfortable. And guess what? It needs to be talked about.
Yeah, this is definitely uncomfortable, and that's what you have to start with these uncomfortable, awkward conversations, and I think people need to understand. So there's the argument that was a long time ago, and I didn't do it; it wasn't me who did it, but you are benefiting from because you're still getting that head start from or that better treatment from,
Right.
what went on basically in the past. And so from this, and you didn't have your family, families uh, torn apart initially, like with enslavement. You had no control over your family. You don't keep your babies. You don't get to, and then when it's over, then they do things like sterilize you and try and do complete different acts of genocide, so that they don't have no control. So let's not multiply you, and and then collect the men and incarcerate them, because you just don't want them around if you're not owning them. And so that's kind of how the whole, we're not even going to get into the whole, because we're talking about women and people with uteruses.
Right.
But anyway, so it's just really, if you go back, and it's a shameful aspect, but it's how this country was created. And so it needs to be acknowledged. I went to Australia last year, and one of the things that really stuck out for me is when we went on tours and different things that were going around, was the white people's apologetic tone and speech of how they had treated and done wrong the indigenous people there, the Aboriginal people. And I was thinking, what? This would never happen where we live. This doesn't happen. And apparently it's only recently happening there. They've been a long time trying to get that going. And because they banished those folks to certain lands as well. And they took their children away from them and thought they could educate them better and raise them in white homes. And they were just terribly mistreated as well. And so now they're saying, well, everything we did was just horrible. It was a horror show, and we should not have done it, and we apologize. And so we're ashamed of that part of our history, but we acknowledge that we did it, and we're trying to make amends. And so, if anybody in America would stand up, and a leader would stand up and start there, it would be something. But I don't know.
Make sure you're registered to vote in November.
Definitely wear a mask so you can be alive to vote on November 3rd, because definitely that's what I'm doing.
Or if you're going to vote for the same person who's currently in office, I don't know. Please don't.
I don't know.
I was going to say something not nice, but I'm not even going to.
Well, the thing about the person who's in office is that he has proven himself to not be supportive of women and women's rights and women's bodies and anything that has to do with the female anatomy and gender and party. And so so with that said, I don't understand why you would choose to have someone lead you and your nation who has no interest in you and your well-being. Not at all. And
so we have a lot more that we were going to try to talk about, and not a whole lot more time. So I do not at all want to cut you off, but I don't know if you want to try to move ahead or if you want to skip things. Or
I think that I just want to talk a little bit about with women. I think that we can, this is worth another episode. So I just want to talk about, the high rates of pregnancy related deaths among Black women, that, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to die than white women. And also the pregnancy related deaths, and also their infants have a high rate of infant and newborn death as well. And so, and it doesn't, I said, it didn't matter with me, Black women's reproductive health care is jeopardized, is suspect, is dismissed, and it's at risk. You are at risk of death. I mean, a high profile case is Serena Williams, and she has all the money in the world, and she's famous, world famous, and loved by people, Black and white, pretty much. And she just about died. She wasn't listened to, and she almost died. And I understand something similar happened to Beyonce when she had her twins. It was a similar situation. And so these are high profile people. Imagine if you have a small voice, like no one's, you're just, you're not in the medical field, you're just a lay person, and you're just trying to tell your story and how you're not well. And no one's listening, like they didn't listen to me either. Black infants are twice as likely to die as white infants. And there is a correlation if you look at the stats between color and low birth weight. And that, I think it kind of boils down to, at best it would be implicit bias, but really it's racism and people not even understanding about.
So there was a study, I think 2004, where they took out every other variable and looked at just perceived racism, and saw that just perceived racism alone, so Black women who had said, I have been discriminated against, they were more likely to have a low birth weight. That was a better predictor of a low birth weight infant than was smoking. Okay, so that is like enormous. So you are doing, like, you are harming actively Black people if you are not actively being anti-racist. So just keep that in mind before you call someone who's bird watching, Karen.
And because calling the police on someone like that means a whole different story than it does.
It could mean their life. So I just want to be very clear.
Yeah.
Look at Elijah McClain. I'm sorry, I'm going to get off topic. This is very, PR knows I get like bananas about this, but like, look at Elijah McClain. Someone called the police because he looked, quote unquote, not right, because he, was different, because he had a hoodie on, because he had a ski mask on, because he was cold, and he was murdered. So you need to be very sure before you make that call that it's the right call to make. And if you're really concerned about the person, maybe you step up and see if they need some help.
Yeah. He's the person who played violin for the kitty cats. I mean, it's just really, it's a very sad situation. And so, it is a lot. I grant you that it's a lot, but it's a lot being for us who walk in those shoes. And so the change does have to come from white people. White people built this racist system, so it's up to white people to dismantle it, really, and to build something. And we can join in at that point and build something new and better and just for everyone. And so, we didn't even get into the whole, the killing of people. We're mostly trying to address the issue with women, but we can certainly do an episode with regard to that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, it's important to know that racism and police brutality in this country, shootings, profiling, unnecessary violence, Black women are more likely to get arrested with an increased risk of sexual harassment and sexual assault while they're, under whatever suspicion. And that number even increases if they are LGBTQIA, if they are gender nonconforming, if they're trans, if they're disabled, they're at an increased risk. This is a vulnerable population.
Absolutely.
Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. That is insane. And 99% of cases of police violence in 2015 did not have the officers involved be convicted of the crime. So people are being murdered, and in 99% of the cases, their murderers are just walking free like they did nothing. And that is where this is an issue.
People need to understand that, officers, you choose that occupation. You choose to be an officer. With that comes certain risks. And I would hope that you're choosing to be a peace officer, and really they're not. They're going. It's a whole nother scenario that we need to devote another episode to, because we want to do it justice. But it just really, we have to stand our ground and keep protesting and vote and vote and vote and make sure that people are listening to what we want to happen.
Now, not to say, I mean, as women who have potentially, and people who have potentially encountered assault and who may be triggered by what is sort of our only other choice, I hear you. I am not dismissing you in any way, but I want you to take a moment, if you're able to get through that trauma, and look at all the other transgressions by the other person and try to make the best decision. If it's between a dumpster fire and like a shit sandwich, like try to make the best decision for you. Everyone can't be Hillary. So okay, if it's okay with PR, I just wanted to say a couple things because I feel like, again, this falls in our hands, especially as white cisgendered women, as white women in healthcare. So I want to say what you can do as a midwife: be aware of these health disparities, address them, listen to and love your Black patients. They need to be treated equally as everyone. Address their possible stressors, concerns, trauma. I'm taking time in each and every one of my visits with patients now, especially if they are Black or a person of color, to say, how are you feeling right now? How are you being affected? What can I do? Is there something I can help you with? Because we need to be listening, and then we need to be learning and evolving. Make sure you're educating yourself and others. It is not PR's job to tell you what you should know. And I will continue to tell people, read, look it up. Now, I know it can be triggering and it can be hard, but again, we have the privilege to be able to dismiss it, as she said. And so you need to look at your own shit and say, okay, I'm going to give myself an hour to read about this and really educate myself. And then if you need to turn it off, then you meditate a little bit, or then you watch an episode of Parks and Rec or whatever it is that you do to try to like make it all lovey-dovey again. But it needs to happen. And do not tolerate racism in your office or care. White cisgendered women, I'm speaking specifically to you. Use your privilege. We are largely seen as non-threatening, and we're less likely to incur violence. So use your voice. I think of all the times I've interacted with police and been terrified, I have never felt comfortable with that type of authority. My skin has protected me because I guarantee that I looked shifty as I was like shaking, at the steering wheel. But I didn't get asked to get out of the car. I didn't get assaulted because I am white. Okay. I can run down my street without fear of being murdered. My boys are more likely to be killers than to be killed because they are white. My healthcare concerns are met with concern. Listen, there were 5 million mostly white women who marched during the Women's March, who protested, and there was no violence. And it's not because they were nonviolent. It's because the police did not target them, because our system did not set them up to be assaulted, to be shut down, right? So we need to do better. We need to speak up. We need to protect our fellow Black men, women, non-binary people, okay? Correct those around you. Read, learn, speak up, teach your children. It is never too young to teach them. Support Black-owned businesses, and please freaking vote.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. We'd like to thank our Rev Kev and our Baobab Tree Studios, our friends, family, and all of you who make this podcast possible. Please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen. Like us, please give us many stars, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Midwife Crisis Podcast, or email us at midwifecrisispodcast@gmail.com. Until next time,
arrest Breonna Taylor's killers.
And the best protection from all kinds of things is to lávate las manos, wash your hands, por favor.
Bye.
Adios.